Welcome back to the Rebels Edge. Pete and I will break down for you some Super Bowl prop bets, as well as whether Google's earnings and or Uber's earnings were as bad as they looked last night. We'll have that and more on the Rebels Edge. Bang!
Here we go. We're almost there, and you're not here with us tomorrow, unfortunately, but you're here today, which is a good thing.
I'll be down with Ray Lewis.
That's right.
Mike Tannenbaum from ESPN, and let me see, Doug Flutie, Pete.
Oh, our guy,
our old buddy
Flutie.
Doug.
Yeah, that'll be cool. I'll tell you what, those are big names. When you really back off a little bit and look back in the history of the last maybe 25 years or so, I mean, talk about some names. Those are as big a names as they get. I mean, holy smokes, that's awesome. And Doug's a great guy. Doug's a great guy. Boy, I'm still amazed how well he played at the levels that he played, John, given, some of the size that everybody always talks about. It's true. I mean, he's a pretty small guy. I mean, I give him credit for what he was able to do. Amazing career, actually.
Pete, was he about the same size as your quarterback, Hohensee? Because
Probably.
you had two big quarterbacks when you were at the University of Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
And Hohensee was not a big guy. He was a little guy.
Right.
And he did really well in arena football too, I think, didn't he?
He's still coaching arena football. I mean, the guy's been a football guy forever. He does camps. He does this. He does that. He's an amazing guy. And also, John, cock strong, as we used to always say. I mean, he was a guy who was, back in the day, they used to have workout All-American team. He was the workout All-American quarterback. He could bench almost just under 400 pounds. So big, strong kid, man, for a guy who's big, thick, but he didn't have the height, which is something that hurt him, I think, for the NFL.
Yeah. Well, folks, here on the Rebels Edge, we talk a little football because Pete played for 6 years in the NFL and the World League. And I played 4 games.
Still 4 games, man.
That makes me an expert. Pete, I love every once in a while some guy will give me crap on Twitter. And I'll always look, just because I'm a dick, of course, I'll always look and see, okay, how many followers does he have and how long has he been at it? So I saw this one guy that gave me a hard time, and he had 94 followers, and he'd been a member of Twitter since 2015. So I said, hey, man, first of all, congratulations. Somehow you got 94 people to follow you in 10 years. I said, keep up the good work.
Let me tell you something. That was deserved, though, because what a tool. And, that's the world we live in, John. They sit behind their screens and they're typing and everything. I'm pretty sure a lot of these guys who say things that are inappropriate probably wouldn't say those in person, would be my guess.
Yeah. I doubt it. I doubt if they'd say I'm in person. But anyway, let's dive into Macro Minute, Pete.
Yeah.
Private sector employment, well, it was actually up. 183,000 in January. That beat expectations of 150,000. And again, that is the private sector employment report, folks. We get the real BLS report on Friday. So we'll have to wait for that one. What do you got for macro, Pete?
For macro, I'm going to just go this way, John. A week ago, the whole conversation was DeepSeek, right? I mean, that was it. And then all of a sudden we moved to tariffs. And that's all we've talked about since Monday. And it's just tariff talk. So we keep on winding our way through that, and understandably so. I'm not putting this to the side and just dismissing it as not important. It is, but that's been what's affecting markets. You know what's great about today? We're back to earnings. That's what's really moving the markets today, whether it's Google or AMD or whatever. I mean, all of these various stocks coming out with their earnings, Uber included. That's what we're focusing on, which I like to see that. Let's talk about the stock market, right? Let's not have to have everything be political or everything be some sort of a crazy story. And I think what we're seeing now is we've reverted back over towards earnings.
I would say that's true, Pete. And I would also say that some of these tariffs have already had a pretty dramatic effect on crude oil, Pete.
Yeah.
So as far as fantastic futures, I'm going to say 2 things quickly. One, crude oil It's down. It's right now trading 71 and change. It was 75 prior to these tariffs, Pete. And number two, the 10-year, 4.42, Pete.
Yeah.
So we're down pretty substantially from that high that we hit 10 days ago. What do you have?
Well, and you and I talk about this all the time. My two go-tos every single day. First thing I look at, John, volatility. I want to know where it is. Secondly, the 10-year. Where is that? What direction is it going? And yesterday I was talking about the 10-year. The VIX, though, we're starting to see a little bit more consistently, John, more and more VIX being traded. And the overwhelming side of that seems to be looking to the upside of what could happen in the VIX. Now, as we've talked about, it oftentimes going to be a one-shot opportunity because when you spike on the VIX, which is what these option players are looking at right now, you better be ready, and you have to be there in front of your screens to be able to react to that because it doesn't last very long. But that being said, we've seen some puts being sold in the VIX. We're seeing calls getting bought to the upside in the VIX. I think our buddy 50 Cent is behind a lot of this, John. The last thing I would say is this. How about the run that we've seen out of gold of late? I mean, holy smokes, year to date, we're up 11%, but for a full year, 52 weeks, we're talking about 40+%, John. So keep an eye on gold. I don't think everybody's really paying as much attention to that one. That's another one of those go-tos that I look at each and every day. A lot less as far as the markets, but to some degree, it certainly is a statement. And I think we're seeing a pretty big statement as we sit there and look at this thing getting closer and closer to 2,900.
Absolutely. And 3,000's got to be the next target after 29, Pete.
Yep.
All right, let's talk about Google because the stock has flatlined since it came out with earnings last night. It's down 7%. Does it rally back to down 3? No. Does it fall to down 10? No. When I say flatline, I mean, Pete, like this, 7% drop, and it's just laying there. The company basically said revenues were in line. In other words, the sales they made were in line with expectations. Overall, the revenue was up 12% for the quarter. But the problem here is, Pete, that their cloud is not doing for them what a lot of people thought it should. That and the spending on AI are why the stock's down 7%, right?
Yeah, and I would say this, John. I think they're misreading it. I'm looking at Google and I think, you know what? When you put up some of the numbers that they've been able to put up, now I understand the negative side, and that's why it's getting pushed down a little bit. I think that's almost creating a bit of an opportunity, to be honest with you, as we see this thing getting pushed to the downside. We're talking about a major company that's sitting there, John, right now with a 23 PE. I think that's pretty damn fair, quite frankly. And a stock that, when you look at the balance sheet, there is nothing negative about this thing. Do they have the money to spend? They absolutely do. Are they going to spend it? They absolutely are. They are committed to this whole thing, right? They're committed to AI. They're committed to cloud. I can understand why the cloud probably is something that is the major reason I think that they're looking at some of the pressures on this. But being down 8%, I got to tell you something. I think this is an opportunity. And I don't know if it is today necessarily, but this is one of those names where you better watch it really close because everything I'm looking at, John, their free cash flow is $41 billion. Their cash over debt, it's only $64 billion. So can they spend? They sure as heck can.
Yeah, and when you look at the year's revenue, Pete, the full year, the revenue was nearly $1 billion a day. Put that in your pipe and smoke it. Yeah. $350 billion for a year. So that's a pretty heroic lift by any firm. And Google, if you get a chance to pick some up, down 7%, doesn't seem bad to me either, Pete.
No.
What about AMD? So this one has suffered. Down 10%, better than expected earnings. But data center, which is really one of the things they have to hang their hat on these days, Pete, that sparked the sell-off because the data center numbers were not what the street had been at least projecting, if not told, that they should be in the ballpark of. So if revenue's, 7.7 billion, but it's softening up in the data center, that's not good news for AMD shareholders.
No, it certainly is not, John. And that is the biggest problem. I think the other thing is they talked a little bit about AI being deceleration, which you never want to hear deceleration on anything if you're the CEO of a company that's producing their earnings. And that's what they said. They said AI, there's a little bit of an issue there. The forecast, it was okay. This is a stock, John, that has not been actually keeping up at all with their biggest competition, which has been NVIDIA, right? I mean, we used to always go back and forth. Which one do you want to be in? Do you want to be in NVIDIA? You want to look over at AMD? Lisa Su, all these different things. I think that the reality is they're getting their clock getting slammed pretty good, John, because AMD, not just this quarter, not just in the last couple quarters, we're talking about in the last year, this stock has not performed. And I think that there's a little bit of an issue there. They've got some growth, obviously, but and an unbelievable balance sheet. That all is there. But they just don't seem to be keeping up enough right now, John. And I think there are other better places to be. And they've got to prove to us that they can get better and be better at what they're doing. And obviously, data centers, that's everybody's focus. And that's disappointing. That's not good.
Well, then we've got Uber, which instead of being uber good was sort of uber soft, Pete. The stock was down 3%, then 5%. Now it's down 7%, I think, or something like that, Pete. You would have expected perhaps a little bit better out of these guys, given that this quarter does hit a lot of the, I'll say it, parties and all the rest that people probably, other than just using it to get to and from the airport or to and from work, throw in a bunch of parties that people go to around the world. It's not just a U.S.-centric thing. Their gross bookings were good and numbers were up, Pete, but the guidance just wasn't there either, was it?
No, the outlook, they talked about that, the gross bookings, and they missed what the expectations were there. That really was the primary negative that I saw, John. I mean, I look at the rest of the things and I'm like, this is kind of a little bit nitpicky right now. I mean, their revenue was up year over year 20%. That doesn't sound like such a terrible thing to me. So when you're looking at this year, yes, they kind of pulled back a little bit on gross bookings. Maybe they're going to be wrong. Maybe they're setting something up, because I look at this one at 54 to 87. That's the 52-week range, and they're sitting at 64. So they're a heck of a lot closer to the 52-week lows. This is a name where I start looking at it and I don't want to overpick on them. And I don't think you need to. I think Uber actually is sitting in a pretty good spot. Yes, that outlook wasn't as good as people wanted it to be. I'll tell you what, I think they're going to be able to beat it then. Maybe they lowered it just a little too much for the appetite right now. But I think going forward, maybe in the next couple of quarters, we're going to see this stock rebound pretty nicely.
Well, lastly, Pete, let's talk about one that you have talked about excessively on like the cocktail hour, as well as whenever you and I get together with the team and we talk about stocks. I mean, this stock, we've been in it, Pete, you, not me so much, but you've been talking about this one when it was sub $2 a share. That's Big Bear AI. Well, basically, decision intelligence for defense and national security. Does that sound like something that people would want? In particular, of course, places where they're trying to lighten up on payroll? I'd say yes. And this one is benefiting from that, Pete. Like I said, this summer it was $1.60 or something like that. Today, I think it might have gone up over $6 on the highs, Pete. And we had unusual activity. You bet we did, folks. Unusual activity looked like that, with the stock at, what was that, $3.18 or something like that, Pete? It nearly doubled to today's number, 567, and might have gone higher than that after I started trading some other stuff. What do you think?
Yeah, unbelievable move to the upside, and I think it's been a sort of probably even an exaggerated move, John. I'm not trying to poo-poo the move. It's an impressive move, 35% to the upside. I'd say not so bad. Kind of in that same world, a little bit of a Palantir and all that type of a thing. The Defense Department, intelligence, it kind of all adds up. They've got a lot of things that have been moving in their favor, but this contract that they're talking about as well, John. There's a lot of different reasons why this stock is just kind of making a nice move and continuing to make that nice move. It doesn't hurt the fact that the shorts are somewhere between 15 and maybe call it 25 or maybe even 30%. They're getting squeezed, and that's what's really pressing this thing to the upside. So just be conscious of that, because at some point these shorts are going to probably start covering a little bit, which is great until they're done covering, and then all of a sudden you don't have quite as many buyers out there. So I'd say there's a good reason to have a little bit of caution after this huge move. Like you said, in July, it's trading $1.60, and now here we are trading somewhere in the $7 range or thereabouts. So pretty interesting one. I like where they are, John, in terms of who are they looking at? And they're looking at AI, but they're looking at the intelligence, the defense, the security, and all the rest of that. Boy, that sounds a lot like some of the information we were hearing from Palantir the other day.
Yeah, and look at what they were buying, folks. Middle of December, they're buying the March 350 calls. Well, the stock is more than double that. It's the stock today, Pete, got up as high. I said 6, I misspoke. 7, got up as high as 740 today.
Yeah.
So when you're long a call that gives you the right to buy it at 350 and you paid $1 for that call and the thing explodes to the upside and you have another month to trade it, another month all the way out till March, it's looking pretty good for all the holders of Big Bear Holdings, I'd say.
Yeah. They got some pretty big implied volatilities there, though, now, because of the fact that this thing is just on fire and the kind of moves that it's making. So, you know what? Just keep that in mind, too, for those that are kind of taking a look at this one.
Well, take a look. Speaking of taking a look, Pete, take a look at this. This is your buddy Saban, Pete.
I love him.
Talking about one of the premier running backs in football. Now, we've talked about Christian McCaffrey being one of the fastest and one of the most versatile because he's a great pass catcher, which people haven't necessarily accused King Henry of being that, Pete. But King Henry will run right over people. And that's why they got him at Alabama. And let's give a listen to Saban talking about him as a pass blocker.
Like Derrick Henry. All right, so he's a freshman, and we're doing like a team pass drill.
I go back a long ways with him, John. He was at Michigan State back in the day.
About pass protection, pass blocking, none of this.
They gave him the ball 60 times.
The coach is getting all the offensive coordinator. He doesn't pick up the right guy or something, and the offensive coordinator is getting on him so bad. I'm like, I feel sorry for this guy. I'm gonna go, rub his neck a little bit.
Rub his neck.
He looks at me and he says, Coach, he says, I don't know anything about any of this shit. He said, all they did in high school was turn around and toss me the ball and tell me to run with it. That's all I know about football.
That's all I know.
So can you all have a little patience?
He's one of the best, John. He's such a fun guy, and I know that he always had a bad reputation at Bama, and, he wasn't great on those conferences and as far as what people wanted. I disagree. I thought he was always great. I liked his deadpan looks that he would give reporters when they'd ask a stupid question, because there is a lot of stupid questions out there. But yes, this guy, everywhere he's been except for the Miami Dolphins, he's a winner. I mean, everywhere you go. Michigan State, that's back in my era. Then he goes to LSU, and pretty damn good. Then he goes to the pros. It didn't work out all that well. It's a different game. Pro football is such a different game than college football. It's getting closer to being the same, but in this whole era, it's just different. You're dealing with 17, 18-year-old guys. They're, we all call them men because they look like men, but they take off that helmet. And a lot of the time, John, we look at these guys and go, God, the kid looks 15 years old. It's unbelievable. But they're not much older than that is the reality. So it's just a different thing than having to be a pro coach, and you've got guys who have their own families. They've got kids, some of them even close to teenagers themselves. That's a different guy, and you got to coach him in a different way because he's a true man, and it's just a lot different. And Saban, I think, was very smart to make that move to take that Bama job when he did, because great, obviously, history there, and he's a great coach. He knows how to recruit. He gets the right guys. And I'll tell you what, I don't think King Henry has to do any blocking either. A guy like that, just let him run the football. All right, John, NFL. We
Yep.
always love talking about some of this stuff. And since you're going to be gone tomorrow, and I know you're going to be busy with all these MVP type guys that you're going to be with, but the Super Bowl is upon us. So I'll ask you this one, and then we'll talk about some of the props. We got a couple prop bets. We don't have to do too many of them. Who wins the game, number one? I'm going to say Philadelphia. How about you?
I'd like to see that, Pete. And, if the Zebras don't put on the Kansas City Chiefs underwear tomorrow, or on Sunday rather, I do think that the Eagles are built to beat them.
Yeah.
And the spread keeps narrowing and narrowing, Pete, and it's getting close to almost favoring the Eagles.
Yeah.
Getting close.
All right. Who's the MVP? I'm going to say Saquon Barkley. And here's why. I think Hurts is great. I think he's a very underrated quarterback. I think he's one of the better quarterbacks in football. He can run like a daggone deer. He's strong as an ox. We all seen all those videos of him in the weight room squatting like 600 pounds or doing a leg press with 800 pounds. I mean, the guy is a horse, right? But when I look at Barkley and what he's done for the team this year and opens up the passing game, and you know what? His abilities are there, very much like King Henry, let's be honest. Those two guys, big, strong, fast, they got a lot of things in common. I sort of think that it's going to be Saquon. How about you?
It sure could be, Pete. Obviously, that would be of their team. That would be my favorite, followed by Hurts.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that they've got a couple receivers that if these guys somehow get loose, or if Kansas City misses a tackle and one of those guys goes beyond them, I don't know that anybody catches them.
Right.
So I'll say it's Saquon, Jalen Hurts, and then one of the receiving core would be my third pick as far as in a Philadelphia win. I think one of those three would win it.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. I got one prop, and I'll let you do the rest of them, John. My one prop is this, because it's always fun, I think, because, it's a big deal to sing the national anthem. And they have an over-under every single year for how long is this thing going to go or whatever, right? So I've got it at 120 and a half seconds is what the over-under is. So what do you think on that one? I don't even remember off the top of my head who is singing that, but it doesn't
John
matter.
Batiste.
Oh, that's right. Yep. Yes, you're right. I'm going to say over. Because you know what? It's their opportunity to shine. They want to shine, and they exaggerate length of a lot of different things while they're singing. I'm going to say he's going to go over that. He's going to do 122 or something like that.
And I'm going to say under. And here's why, Pete. They get nervous.
Yeah, that's true.
Because many of them, of course, have not sung before a crowd that big in person. Yeah. Obviously, the world stage is over 1 billion people. But I think that might make them nervous and might make them faster rather than slower. But we'll see on Monday when you and I discuss it. Yeah. Let me throw one out to you, Pete. Will a player or coach cry during the national anthem?
Yes, 100%. 100%. Somebody, I don't know who, but they'll get the camera and have it right on them and talk about the emotion and everything else, right?
Well, last time, Pete, the Eagles were in Nick Sirianni, the Eagles coach. Yeah, he was crying. And that was an emotional deal. I can't remember. Was that when Chris Stapleton did the national anthem, Pete? Because I can't remember for sure. But I do think that somebody will cry, and I'm betting it'll be Sirianni again. All right. Second and final one from me, Pete. Will Travis Kelce propose at the Super Bowl? First of all, I don't care. Second of all, I'm going to say no. What do you think?
I'm going to say no with you. But you know what? Nothing would surprise me with those two either, because they have really milked this thing pretty good. And as much as you and I probably dislike that whole thing, because, should we really pay that much attention to people in the stands? Probably not. But when they're as famous as she is, whether you like her or don't like her or whatever, they're going to show her. And I will say this, she has not hurt. She has absolutely helped, not just a little bit, but on just the NFL itself, some of the ratings and some of that stuff. And I'm like you. I don't want to say all that, but it's all true. She has had an impact. There is absolutely no denying that. She has had an impact, especially on women and younger kids. That's where the real impact has come, John, especially the young girls and all the rest of it. They all of a sudden get interested in football. They get interested in the Chiefs, and they get interested in the Super Bowl. And a lot of that has to do with Taylor Swift.
All right. What else you got, Pete?
Last thing I got is this. Okay, NIL. We talk about it all the time. I'm curious what you think, because I was looking it up and it's very convoluted. It's very confusing to see how much money. So instead of looking at like who has the most of that as far as NIL for college sports, I just wanted to run it out this way. Who are the top 4 or 5 or more, if you want to go deeper, but who are the top 4 or 5? Because I've got a list of what is the quote unquote top 5. I even got the top 10 here, and some of them are a little bit surprising that are not in the top 10. So
well,
I'll
top
start.
5.
Yeah, what do you got?
Georgia, obviously. Ohio State for sure.
Yep.
Oregon. I'm going to say those 3 have to be in it.
Those you're right about that. Ohio State's number 1. Tennessee, believe it or not, is 2. Texas 3. Oregon 4. Miami is 5. Here's the interesting part. Who is not in the top 10? Texas A&M. Really? How is that? I mean, the oil guys, and they'll pay anybody, millions and millions. Bama and Michigan. Those 3 are not in the top 10, which shocks the living tar out of me, but it is what it is. I'll tell you one other shocker. When I was looking it up, and I don't know how accurate these really are, John. Let's be honest, it's probably not very accurate, but one of the most surprising, Louisville. Louisville is in the top 10, which pretty interesting when you really consider it all. They do have a huge basketball, obviously that's a big thing at the school along with football. So maybe they've had to raise that kind of money because of that. But I find it really, really interesting. And I know Ryan Day a few years ago talked about, hey, we need to have at least 15 or thereabout $1 million for NIL. Well, they got over 20 million for Ohio State football for NIL. That I know.
Pete, here's a couple I was surprised by. Iowa Hawkeyes are in the top 20.
Wow. Yeah.
Kansas Jayhawks in the top 20. The fact that I can't name the industries that would be, pumping the money. I mean, is Gulfstream putting the money into Kansas Jayhawks? When you think about the companies that are there, I'm just surprised by those. But I'll leave the rest of you with this thought. Florida probably has 3 of the top 20 in terms of money. And that would be Miami, Florida, the University of Florida. So you've got the University of Florida, and the Seminoles. All 3, Pete, are in the top 20 for cash. So,
smart. John, especially, they're all recruiting the same guys, right? Especially in Florida, because they're going to try to keep those guys in Florida and try to keep them from going to Ohio State and Michigan and USC and Oklahoma and everybody else. But yeah, it's turned into professional sports, man. That's what it is. The NIL is where it is, and it's interesting to see how fast this has grown. It's unreal. When you talk about just donations, though, you were right about one, Oregon. I mean, and they got one guy. All they need is Phil Knight. That's all they need.
Nike. Yep. That's all you need. And they got it.
Yep.
That's why they've got 17 different uniforms, Pete. I don't know how many different helmets. Can you imagine between the helmets and the jerseys are cheap compared to the helmets. Helmets are $700 a piece. And I guarantee they don't just strip them down and put a new wrapper on it, Pete. They must have multiple helmets for these kids. But anyway, well, Pete will be here tomorrow, folks, with Mark Lepresti at 1:00 Eastern time. I will be down in the Super Bowl with the Players Impact, with Ray Lewis, with Mike Tannenbaum from ESPN, with Doug Flutie, the Heisman Award winner. We're going to have a great time. We'll have some special content that we'll be posting through tomorrow all the way through the weekend. And so make sure you tune into The Rebel's Edge at 1 p.m. Eastern time tomorrow. Bang.